Hey, lovely. Good to see you.
Good morning. Hello. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm good. I'm interested to see where this conversation will go because as I just said to you briefly before the call, this thought only entered my mind yesterday and hasn't been developed since then. So we are going to be exploring very much in real time, which we always do, but I feel like previous conversations that we've had, I've known a little bit more about how I feel, how I think about that particular topic, whereas this one feels very fresh. So it feels quite exciting.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I think that that in itself is something really important, just
Mm.
exploring what it looks like to not have a fully formed idea and to play off
Yeah.
different sides of it, to kind of feel the edges of it is it's really useful in defining anything that we think about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's going to be fun. Okay, so yesterday I was just sat and I had been, I'm always listening to podcasts, reading, reflecting. It's quite a natural state for me to be in. And this wasn't prompted by anything that I'd like read or listened to, but I feel like it was the culmination of like some states that had been experienced as I've been like listening and reading over the past couple of weeks. And and this line came into my head of your highest self is not a mental construct. And I was like, wow, like where's that come from? Like that sounds very profound. Um,
I love that when you hear a thought in your own head that's like, oh, that's
yeah,
a good one.
yeah. And I think that the joy, so part of having some disidentification from that stream of words in your head is that you don't have to take credit for them all, right? You can be like, wow, as if someone else said it.
Yeah,
um
yeah.
it's really fun for me to be like, oh, like I didn't come up with that, in that way. So anyway, that's a whole other topic. But um but I realized like, yes, that is very true for me today, that my higher self is not a mental construct. But there was a time in the last decade, 6 years, where it felt like my higher self was a construct. And it felt like not only did it feel like that for me when I inquired into it, because I was looking at it through this lens of like objectivity, like I was seeing it as an object. There's me and then there's the object. And not only was it that, but it was also, I feel like I was being guided by things that I was reading, like things I was downloading, things I was watching at the time, that almost fed into that idea of conceptualizing your higher self, being like, what does your
Mm.
higher self look like? How does she walk? How does she talk? Like those kind of questions, which were helpful at the time. Like there's nothing wrong with them. And it wasn't a bad path to be going down. But I feel like there's just been a deepening or a widening of like what that means to me. And now it feels really, really untrue that I could conceptualize it in that kind of a way. Like I wouldn't be able to answer a question like that today because I just can't connect or resonate those things together.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a very clear difference for me between the higher self as a form of like almost like self-flagellation, like
Mm.
as like this version of you is doing very poorly at life. So therefore, how would your highest version of yourself, how would that version navigate life and emulate that? Do all of those things that that version of you would do, and therefore you'll be better. There's a
Mm.
better there's a big difference between that and I think what you're talking about, which is no, you explain. Tell me where it's moved to now. Can you even give it any more description or any difference between that?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think so. And I really agree with what you just said. Like it was definitely before coming from a place for me of like this here now is not enough and a seeker type energy, you know, a seeker level of consciousness that I was operating out of, being like, there's something out there that's better than what's here now. What's
Mm,
what's here now and who I am and who I'm expressing as now is somehow defective, not enough, could be better. Like any kind of um, anything like that was just very, very present. So it makes sense totally. So thank you for bringing that in. And to answer your question now, what it feels like when I say it's beyond a mental construct, it's because the part of me that feels like the true highest self, and I'm not even sure that language really is the right language, but we'll just stick with it for now. Maybe we can explore the language of it in a bit, but um it feels beyond words, it feels beyond language,
mm,
because anything that's language, anything that's like words in my mind is like story and thoughts, and all of that feels like the mind, you know, like those words come from the mind. That's the realm that they exist upon. And so it's mind, right? Anything that's a mental construct is mind, no matter how beautiful it is, right? There's nothing wrong with the mind. The mind is incredible. The mind, look at the human mind and what it's achieved in the world. Like it's amazing what it can do. It's just that it could never be the highest self because it can only exist within its mental construct. It, you know, and language can only exist within that realm. So I hope this is making sense, but um it feels beyond that. It feels like you probably couldn't describe it. And so I guess it really feels um like not that. Not that. It's kind of, I don't
yeah.
really have a that for it. I just have a not that for it right now. And maybe that will, maybe it will develop, but it can't be a story, right? Like it, for me, it feels like it can't be a story. It can't be like, and so then we're into the realm of no language.
Mm,
And so then, okay, I can say, like, well, maybe it's in the realm of feeling, maybe it's in the realm of emotion, but that doesn't feel right either. And
mm,
so, you know, it has to be on a different plane to those things.
yeah. I am intrigued by this thread of language
Mm,
because I know we've spoken about when we were talking about um the what is spirituality question,
yeah.
your exploration of self and understanding of the I, um has shifted as you've explored spirituality and what it means to you.
Mm.
um so can there be a higher self, therefore, if any association with self leads you deeper into an I mindset,
Mm.
um into that being the way that you see not only yourself but the world in like pockets of eyes. um
Yeah.
is self the right language for it?
Yeah, I think it's a good place to be going with this because it almost feels like if it's not described in language, if it's not described in story or narrative, um, you know, it's not real in that way that we see things as real. Yeah, this is so hard to talk about, but it can't be something we describe if it's beyond language because that those
Mm,
two things cancel each other out. So it does feel like it must be that shining light of consciousness that enlivens all things. And it's been interesting to follow this thread of self and what is the self and what is I and all of that, and go down that path more, because it's been really beautiful for me to see some things there. And I was listening to a podcast this week where the person had gone really deep into non-dual practices and had really suffered greatly as a result of completely getting rid of any sense of self. Like she had totally abandoned this idea of having a personal individual part of her, and went really deep into this no self route, which I've seen some teachers in non-duality talk about that. That's never felt right for me. The times I think I've mentioned to you before, like early on that journey of research, I delved in a little bit to that way of describing it, and ended up feeling like really ungrounded, really mentally unstable, really unwell. And so I, very much pulled back out of those spaces like pretty quickly. But from what I understand, she carried on and she followed that path down, and felt really not well by the end of it. And I can really understand that, because I think that is a core misunderstanding in this. Is like, what I'm believing this to be is not that there's no self at all, but that it's not what we think it is. It's not the voice in our head, it's not the language. So I guess what I'm saying is, and what my understanding at this point is that the highest self is who we each really are. And we just think that we're this other thing. We think we're the I that chats away in our heads. But when we disidentify with that, what are we left with? We're left with what you could call the higher self.
Interesting. Yeah, I love that. Because there is something very very scary to me about complete disassociation from the self. And I think that and I don't think it creates a world where we're all working, in theory it creates a world where we're all interconnected and everyone's beautifully supporting each other, and we're all part of something greater. But when you lose yourself, you lose your purpose within that. And I think that's scary to me, to have an entire community of unselfed people. It's like, okay, well, if that's, where's the individuality or the any of those things that are beautiful about us as humans? And so I think that's a really beautiful way of explaining it, that there would you say that this higher self then is like an attainable version? Or when we think about so when I think about like the core consciousness of us, that kind of the being beneath everything that kind of conditions us on top, and all of the chatter of the mind, it's not necessarily something that for many people, I would probably say most people, is something that is achievable 100% of the time. I think and this is just my own personal belief, that the mind is there, will always be there within our current human kind of evolutionary state. So would you say that the higher self, as we're exploring it in this very very fresh way, would you say that is an attainable version of us within, like, with the mind included?
So I don't necessarily see it as either attainable or unattainable, because I almost see it as there anyway, like exists regardless of whether we're conscious of it. So maybe yeah, so it's a really hard one, isn't it? Because I see what you're asking and also find it really hard to answer, because it's almost like the image that's coming into my mind is like if someone was holding a torch or a flashlight for our American friends, um, and it was shining this light onto just a white blank background. It's almost like you could put different like slides with all beautiful cutout images and like templates, like you could put different templates over that light, and I kind of see it as we are both the light of the flashlight and our individual template pattern that we uniquely express into the world.
Mm.
And so they only exist together. If you just have the template, you don't have anything. If you just have the light, you don't have anything, right? You have to have them both together to see what's there. And so I guess what I'm hearing you say is like, is it attainable to not have the template and just have the flashlight? And it's like,
Mm.
I think it is, but why would we want that? Like,
Yeah.
surely we want the beauty, like we want the beauty of like all of these different expressions. Like everyone's template's totally different. Every pattern each person makes when the light of consciousness shines through them is unique. And that feels really beautiful to me. And so I think what this woman had done is like she totally like ripped up her template and was like, I'm just consciousness, I'm just the light. Um, but within that, like you lose everyone else's templates, you lose seeing all of that diversity and all of that intricacy. I think what the key feels like for me is realizing that I'm not just the template. Like I'm not, because before, when you're just fully identified with the mind and like the voice in your head as I, and that's who you think you are, like you're not seeing the light, right? Like you're not seeing that you wouldn't exist without that light of consciousness shining through you. So in terms of attainability, I think everyone has the capacity to zoom out from their template and see that there's a light shining through
Mm.
that makes it possible for them to express themselves in the world, and that when they can see that they're both, it it opens up something greater.
Mm. Yes. Yes, I get that. And I guess then that the kind of the higher self is not a mental construct. It's kind of as though um is putting a higher self as the pattern, and it's putting
Yeah,
it like as almost like a as an expression, um
yeah,
and instead it's saying you have there's a pattern, and higher self would be the light, correct?
yeah, 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 absolutely. And so yes, and so at the times where I've had my higher self as a mental construct, I've been just cutting out a little higher self shaped pattern in my template and being like, that's it, that's what I'm aiming for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it to me that sounds like it's like that continuation of like a purist mindset, like a perfection, um like you've got to be good, you've got to be like it's just another sneaky way of having to do everything right. And is your higher
Yeah.
self always right in that thinking?
In terms of the light.
I guess there's no right or wrong,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that's dissolves away.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think the same thing kind of sneaks in, doesn't it? It's it
Yeah.
sneaks in like the higher self um is the purest version. It's still
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. 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 So absolutely. So in the template version of the higher self, definitely. I mean, that self can be so many different things for so many people. That self could be right. That self could be wrong. That self could be evil. It could be pure. Like it because it could be anything. And like there's some beauty in that, right? But yeah, if we think of the real higher self as being the light and that being the same light that shines through everyone, right? There's only one light, here's where the oneness comes in, here's where the unity consciousness comes in, which I think is so lovely to have both. Like, so lovely to say, yeah, we are one, and yet we're all totally unique expressions, that this oneness is shining through. Like, that just, it feels so good to me. And it takes off a lot of pressure, because I feel like, oh, I don't have to become that higher self. Like, that is constantly, it's like the sun. It never goes away. Like, even if it seems like it goes away, it's still there. It's continually burning, continually shining, infinitely. And there's nothing I have to do to make that happen. So it takes so much pressure off to become your higher self. And this is where the seeker energy drops away, because it's like, I don't have to do anything for my higher self to be here. It's here all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. How does that affect like the way, if we take kind of living with the higher self as a seeker, from the seeker
Mm.
energy with like a purpose of becoming the higher self, and
Mm.
then compare that to what we're talking about here, how
Mm-hmm.
does that affect the way that almost like you live? You know, how does that affect the way that you operate day to day with other people? Because the energy of it feels very different.
Yeah, and I guess what it does for me is it dropping the seeker energy was such a huge like thing, and it creeps back in sometimes because it has a little cutout on my template, right? There's a little cutout that's like, I'm a seeker. So it's there. And but when I am able to, dropped so much of it, and it just creeps back in sometimes in little moments. But being in that, in comparison to being out of it, feels very stressful. And it was like I couldn't have even told you that it was stressful from within it, because it just felt like there was no other option. It felt like the other option to not be a seeker would be, it's like saying, oh, in my template, there's something that says I'm a seeker. Well, to replace that with not a seeker feels awful. That just feels like I'm lazy. It feels like I'm not open, or, there's all these connotations for me. So if I play it with it at that level, both feel stressful. Whereas if I'm able to totally come out of that, then there is just a calmness about life. There's an acceptance, there's greater presence, there's a lot less pressure in my physical being, in my emotional self, in my mental self. And it's not to say that like life becomes perfect or like anything like that, or I reach that goal, because there becomes no goal. Like, there becomes, the goal is just to notice the beauty of that light shining through all of its different cutouts on the template. And then from there, it's like I can actually appreciate life, and stop trying to change it, right? When you stop trying to change the template, or when, no, that's not it, right? Because like, from this place, you can then look at the template and be like, well, there's some stuff on that template that's really not serving me or the world, right? Like, you can see from this separate point, but because you're no longer saying that's me, you're no longer being like, I'm bad, I'm rubbish, I need to change. You're just being like, oh, there's some stuff in that template that isn't really serving me and isn't serving the world, and it doesn't feel right anymore. So it's like a lot more measured, a lot more calmer approach to change and transformation.
Yes, I love that. And I think that's, so the first step for me in change is always compassion. Like,
Yeah.
the before we do anything at all,
Yeah.
whether it's the tiniest thing on a coaching call with one of my clients, or whether it's like a larger process of change, the first thing that I always ask is, can we bring in some compassion for this part of you that has existed up until this point?
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly the same, because when we step back into that higher self, into that light consciousness, there is only compassion. There's no drama, there's no guilt, there's no blame. It's just, oh, I see that. I
Yeah.
see that. And with that comes, I can appreciate that that was the only option for me up until this point.
Yeah, beautiful. And isn't it interesting how the language there of "I see that" is like, we can only see when there's light, right?
Yeah.
And so it sounds to me like what you're saying is, without even like having this example, or knowing like maybe why or whatever, like it just, or maybe you have your own reasons of why, but in this example we're talking about, it's like you're being like, let's see the template, right? Let's
Yeah.
see the light and look at the template instead of being the template and looking for something within it.
Yeah.
So I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's such a key element, if we kind of pull back on the language side as well. All of these expressions are found in a multitude of different religions, in different parts of the world, in different thinking. And I'm kind of reminded back of when we've been talking about human design and those kinds of things. Like, it's not to say that one particular expression is wrong, is incorrect.
Yeah.
It's just that one expression can't be the only right option, because every different flavor of language, every different expression of this undescribable thing, um, is just like it's just the way that we have to use language in order to talk about it. And some people talk about it in Buddhist terms, or some people talk about it, in spiritual terms, in human design, or whatever it is. But it all kind of, or just, as I said, as you know, I'm very physical in the way that I think. I love, like, it's all based in um, how we work in the world, how our human bodies are processing everything. And so for me, it makes sense to bring it back to an emotion, because that's the way that I see it. So I think it's all talking about the same thing.
Yeah, it is. And I think that gives it validity. I feel like some people could be like, well, there's all these different things, so how can one be right? And it's like,
Right.
there's the thread, like the reason that all of these different systems, ways of thinking about this, religions, processes, all of that, the reason they all exist is because innately as humans we are aware of this on some level.
Yeah.
Like, it's in our consciousness. We are, you know even people who never think about things like this, even people who are not on these paths, have a sense that there's something going on like that. Like, they wouldn't use these terms, they wouldn't probably be able to describe it like this, but and I think that just shows that this is a um, a valid experience that many people have, that everyone has really. But the fact that it's talked about, the fact that it comes up in these different ways is like, yeah, but how could it not? Because it's the root and the root of our experience here.
Yeah, exactly. I think and it helps to, there was a time when I was very confused, was very much like, well, how can what I'm thinking be right if Emma's thinking this thing? Or how can, like, is human design true?
Yeah.
What's the right answer? And I've kind of, like, I have reached that point now where it's not that it doesn't matter, it's that it all matters. It's that
Yeah.
it's all, there's an element of truth in everything, and there's and that doesn't discount any of them.
No,
I think
exactly.
there are some things that could probably be, factually proved as incorrect. I don't believe the earth is flat, and all of the all of the things that kind of evolve from that way of thinking. But like there's an understanding now that I'm not wrong, just because somebody else has a different expression of this same thing.
Yeah. And isn't that beautiful, right? Because it's being like, you could never be wrong, because if you were right, it would mean that if there was only one version of right, it would mean that everyone's template in front of that torch would have to look the same.
Yeah.
Like, so it's like, oh no, there can be so many versions of the truth. There isn't really like one ultimate truth that we can speak in words. Like, I think there is that light that is unspeakable is a universal thing. But yeah, the myriad of different ways people talk about it is beautiful. And I happen to favor ones that help me, that point me from within the template to stop looking at the template and turn around and see like, oh, there's a bigger light there shining through this template. Like, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter. I mean, I think for me, like with human design, I got stuck in being like, I got stuck in the template of it. And I think it definitely does have the potential as a system, because it was part of this journey for me of seeing conditioning is like seeing the template, right? So like it was definitely like a fundamental part of this journey for me. And I think that's another thing that feels really important to me is like, it's okay to take a system for a little while, take a religion for a little while, take a body of work for a little while, learn what you have from it, and not have to continue once you're complete with that. Like, it's okay to disregard, because I think people start to feel like it's not okay, like they have to keep focusing on something. And I've never been the kind of person that forces myself to finish books. I have hundreds of unfinished books because I've taken what I needed from it, and I'm not going to force myself like with my precious limited time to keep going back to something that is done. And so I guess that's what this gives me in my life as well. Like, it's a big permission slip to have that template just be whatever it is in each moment, and have it change all the time and different cutouts. And I'm thinking about, when you're a kid and you would fold up a piece of paper and you'd cut all different shapes in it and open it out and it would make like a snowflake. I'm thinking of those and thinking what my life feels like now now I'm not identified with that. I can keep folding it back in and cut different shapes into it and open it out and be like, that's there. Let's fold it back down and do this, because I'm not it. So I'm not as attached to it staying the same. I'm not as attached to it being exactly how I expect it to be. We're trying to control how it comes out. And I think that's quite a good analogy with those snowflake papers, because you can't control how they're going to look at the end. You kind of just have to trust.
You only see the part, you only see a quarter of it or an eighth or whatever it is after you've folded it. You only see that tiny part.
Yeah, exactly. So you can't control what it's going to be. And like, that just feels fun to me, to be like, the light of consciousness is not something I have to fight for. It's not something I have to create. It's not something I have to become. It just is already.
Yeah, I love that. And is there, I had a thought then and then it disappeared from my mind. Oh yeah, what's the I'm curious, what is the are you willing to kind of talk about what is the process or the kind of situational states, or you mentioned right at the beginning that you were kind of moving through different things this week, and that kind of, and then this thought landed. What do you think is useful in order to open up to these type of drop-ins, you know, those kind of things? What was helpful for you this week in receiving this thought?
Well, I think that when I was listening to the podcast that I'd mentioned earlier with the lady who had that experience, and maybe I should mention what that podcast actually was in case anyone wants to listen. It is Tim Freak, which is actually spelled Freke. Maybe we'll put it in the show notes. And he's interviewing a lady whose name is escaping me right now, but we'll put it in the notes under. And I think listening to that, right, because it was titled, there's two parts to it. I've only listened to part one so far, but it's titled something like what's the problem with non-duality, or something like that. It was like asking a question of like, is this really helpful? And
from a place, sorry to interrupt, was that from a place of someone who is like, who is teaching within non-duality, or from a place of someone who is criticizing it?
A bit of both. So they've both been on their journeys sort of through that spiritual path. Tim definitely talks about this kind of stuff. I don't think he would say he's a non-dual teacher or anything like that, but he is someone who is in that field. And the woman is a student of that, of non-duality, who went obviously very deep in, and now she works with people who experience what she experienced with that. Yeah. So she I guess you could say is a critic of certain realms of thought within the non-dual space. And she particularly speaks of Neo-Advaita, which I haven't gone too deep into, but there is like there's many different threads within the non-dual space. So people who have like deep understanding of it and like various experiences. And you know, I'm someone who is on a non-dual path, or who is someone who is like been so amazed by the learning and the depth of understanding that has come through being on that path and learning in these ways. And so I think for me, those drop-ins of inspiration come when you're willing to not hold tight to mental positionalities.
Yeah.
Because if I was someone who was like, this is the path, this is the only path, this is the truth, this is the ultimate truth, and everyone else is wrong about this, like I wouldn't listen to a podcast called What's the Problem with This System? Like, you know, to be listening.
Nothing is the problem with my system.
Yeah, just be like really triggered, really, and that would, you know, would be so identified as a non-dual person, like, you know. So I think dropping identification actually helps those ideas come in, because you're a lot more open. You're a lot more open to anything coming into your space. You're not fixated on your template, that's your template, that's precious, that no one else is allowed to influence or make you see differently. So so interestingly, I do think that I'm a lot more inspired and a lot more connected to those insights and downloads and wisdom that is outside of me somehow, when I'm less identified with my mental constructs, of course.
Yeah, I love that. I heard Richard Osman say on a podcast that to him, creativity is having all of these clouds in your brain, and occasionally two clouds will combine together and create a spark, and that's the moment of creativity, of inspiration. And therefore, your only job as a creative person or as someone who wants to have flashes of inspiration is to just increase the number of clouds that you have moving around in your head at any one point. Whether that is through, as you're saying, through just opening up to different frames of thought, whether it's through changing your environment, your space, the routine of your day, just to give yourself opportunity for the clouds to collide in different ways. And I think that's really important. When we restrict ourselves to one cloud, to one shape of one cloud expressed in one particular way, we're limiting how we can be inspired, how the new creative thought can enter our mind.
Yeah, I love that. It reminds me of something that my beloved Michael Singer says. He's like such a grandparent vibe to me. I love it. He is like my favorite people to listen to are much older people. I just love it. And here's the reason, right? He says, if you've seen a snake, you're a greater being than someone who hasn't seen a snake, right? He's not saying you're better than them, saying you're a greater being. Greater as in like larger, I guess, like your template perhaps has got larger. There is more possibility for light to shine through your template because you're greater. So I love that. And it kind of sounds like what you're saying there of like, how do we allow more clouds in? How do we allow them all to interact? And so, with that, it kind of makes sense that I would really love to listen to people who are a lot older, because likely they are greater beings in that sense than younger people, because they have seen more, they've experienced so much more. So I love that.
Yeah, and that's such a danger in our society, isn't it? The way that as you get older, you're almost like cast aside or put in a little box that's like, oh, you're past it. I even feel that creeping in now, like 34, and looking at younger like Gen Z type people coming in and being like so different and so bringing there's a need for freshness, and I think that's beautiful. And then at the same time, there's still relevance. There's still relevance as you get older and as you accumulate more life and more knowledge. There's so many more clouds that you can have. There's so many more life experiences that you have available to collide in response to any other given situation. And so discarding our worth as we age is dangerous.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And for me, like it does that for me, of being like, yeah, there's value as I age, and it increases with age, if anything. But also this feeling of like, it only does that if you continue as you age to go and have new experiences, right? The problem that happens is that a lot of people reach middle age or reach their 60s, and they're so stuck on their template, right? Like their template is so familiar to them, it's become a comfort blanket, and there's no space for it to grow. So I think it helps me to see, like, I still want to be learning when I'm in my 70s. I still want to be experiencing new things and trying new foods. And I remember my grandparents, like, they didn't want to try Indian food. Like, we had an Indian takeaway and my granddad ordered chicken and chips off the menu. I'm like, Granddad, what are you doing? Like, have some curry. So we do see that, don't we, in people as they get older, they become less open to experience. So I think it helps me to realize that, like, you become that great being, you become that incredibly valuable member of society by the experiences you have, which means that, and that kind of, in a way, softens the fear of death for me a little bit, because then I think, like, it's not about how long you live, it's about how wide you live, right? Like, it's about how big you live.
Yes, I can appreciate that. we're playing on one of my
Yeah.
fundamental triggers here. So I'm immediately
Apologies.
right,
Yeah.
no problem. But immediately I'm like, oh no, still like, there's still a time limit on width of life, Emma.
Oh yeah, it's
I
so complex. A smidge. It doesn't totally, yeah, remove it.
yeah,
Just a
I
little smidge.
yeah, but I do completely understand what you mean, where it's like it doesn't really make any difference the length of life if you are
Yeah.
only living within your pattern parameters,
Yeah.
because you could basically live 20 years exactly the same. So what
Yes,
was the point? Although it
exactly.
sounds very harsh.
Yeah.
Obviously it's still very painful and scary and awful when someone dies, even if they've had exactly the same 20 years. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's a different way of living.
Yeah. Yeah. It inspires the way that I want to interact with this world, these patterns that appear. Um,
Mm.
because I'm almost even thinking like I'm looking up at my window and there's a big oak tree in the garden and it's beautiful right now because all the leaves are orange. And like even that, right? Even that tree is the pattern of a tree held in front of that light. Like
Mm.
if we take it to that extreme, then if you just look around you now, um, imagine if everything that you can see is a pattern of that, the light, and it's just and then life's beautiful, right? The mundane becomes beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a moment yesterday walking down the lane to my house, and the same tree that has been there for the last month and a half that I've lived here was there. And yeah, I saw it differently. I saw it shaped
Yeah.
differently. I was like, I suddenly realized that I was walking beneath the boughs of this enormous tree. And I was like, oh my God, that's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. Um, and then obviously you return to life and the moment it passes, but it's yeah, I love those little moments.
The amazing thing about that story, and like obviously the experience itself is incredible, but that is actually a Zen story. There is a Zen story where a student goes to his Zen master, and every day he walks across this courtyard to get to the Zen master to receive his teaching. And he walks past this tree in the courtyard every single day for years, and then one day he goes to his Zen master and says, I get it, I've got it. And Ross is like, what? And he said, I saw it. He's like, what did you see? And he said, I saw just tree.
Yeah.
And the idea behind it is exactly what you said, that he saw it differently, he felt it in
Yeah.
a new way. So there you go, Alex. You're on the Zen path.
Oh, I love it. I love the Zen path.
Yeah, me too. Oh, I love that. Thank
How's
you for
that feeling for
sharing.
you? Is there anything more that you feel needs to be said there?
No, I think that feels like a beautiful, natural completion for me. How about you?
I feel the same.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and I will see you next time.
Thank you.